I would like to introduce our guest presenter, our dear friend, Eva Ryder. So Eva is a Jungian depth psychotherapist and licensed marriage and family therapist who has been in private practice since 1995. She specializes in working with adults seeking meaning and soul purpose through all life transitions, as well as those working through issues of grief, loss, trauma, stress, abuse, low self-esteem, and life transitions.
Well, that's sort of outdated.
Her extensive training includes a deep study of the psychology of Carl Jung. She trained directly with Marion Woodman in body-soul rhythms and is a certified somatic trauma release exercises therapist, hypnotherapy, soul collage, and movement expression. And she dedicates her work to a synthesis of deep soul psychological exploration, incorporating dream work, expressive arts, astrology, and alchemy, using Hermetic Kabbalah as the map to understanding the self in its journey towards individuation and wholeness. So, welcome, Eva. We are delighted to have you here. And if you'd like to share your screen, hang on, let me let you share your screen.
So we have a couple of questions from Beatrice and Sophia, who are in London. And so it is very early morning, and they are wanting to confirm that this will be recorded so that they can go to sleep.
Yes, it is being
recorded.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you for being here. Yes, if you stay as long as you'd like, it will be recorded. It is being recorded. So thank you. I'm delighted to be with you once again. Many friends here, and just so glad to begin. And this is a program that I offered to the Jung Institute in Zurich on October 31st. And due to the fact that they don't record it, this is the first time it is being recorded, and it will be a little bit different. But I'm so glad to be here. It's a topic that I have been sitting with probably for close to 45 years. As I began my original work, my undergraduate work was in Renaissance history, and it seems like that right now, as we are entering this time of betwixt and between, it seems appropriate. So I will go ahead now, if it's okay, Lisa, and I will share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. All right, can you see this? Want to make sure I have the right one. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, hold on a second because I have to press play. And all right. So, hold on, I have to. Okay, so this is the beginning. So this is looking at the global polycrisis and a renaissance, the current renaissance, we hope, and the renaissance, we're going to be looking at the renaissance of the Western Renaissance. And as maps for meaning for an Aquarian aeon, Jungian perspectives on crisis and metamorphosis. So what we're looking at here is today we introduce and explore the polycrisis as both a collective and a psychological initiation, contemporary nigredo, a darkening of the world soul that precedes the repatterning and renewal. So we're going to look through a Jungian lens, a little bit of alchemy, astrology, and Renaissance humanism. We can trace how crisis becomes a vessel of transformation the chrysalis from which new symbolic imagination may emerge. So we are living through a polycrisis. We could even say a meta-crisis at this point, which we'll look into in a bit. A time when multiple global and psychological crises interact and amplify one another. The old world is dissolving, yet historically such breakdowns often precede rebirths, just as the European Renaissance emerged from the ashes of the medieval world. A polycrisis is a state where multiple crises, ecological, economic, political, technological, psychological, and we could say psycho-spiritual, become interconnected and mutually reinforcing, creating conditions no single system can solve. So the background here is that the term polycrisis was first employed by French philosopher Edgar Morin with Anne Brigitte Kern in Terre Patrie in 1993 to name the simultaneity of these ecological, social, and cultural crises. In 2022, the historian Adam Tooze popularized the concept in economic, geopolitical, and climate discourse. He argued that disparate shocks, pandemics, war, inflation, climate, tech were now interacting so as to overwhelm traditional institutional and narrative frames. The Cascade Institute 2022 paper refined it by distinguishing polycrisis from mere systemic risk. Systemic risk is about fragility within one system. Polycrisis is about multiple systems interacting in crisis. The concept has become a meta-frame in policy, futures, and global risk communities, as the WEF think tanks to name the crisis of crises, which we're certainly in. So again, to be redundant, a polycrisis is not merely multiple crises occurring at once, but a structural condition in which crises are entangled, mutually amplifying and inseparable, so that addressing one crisis in isolation can worsen another, and the whole becomes more dangerous than the sum of its parts. So here the Cascade Institute goes into a global polycrisis occurs when these crises become entangled in ways that significantly degrade humanity's prospects. We're certainly seeing right now. Key features that are attributed are the simultaneity, such as environmental, economic, social, political, as we said, feedback loops and amplification, the blurring of boundaries in crisis, causes, effects, timing overlap, cross purposes and trade-offs. So solutions in one domain may worsen another. Emergent properties, meaning that the collective behavior of all crises together produce new and unexpected dynamics. And a lack of shared meaning, conceptual collapse, growing difficulty in even naming, framing, or communicating the crises in shared narratives. And then from Cambridge, a time of great disagreement, confusion, or suffering, caused by many different problems happening at the same time, so that they together have a very strong effect. So it emphasizes the entanglement, the amplification, the lack of clear boundaries, layering, and emergent complexity as key signatures. And this lack of clear boundaries is a signifier that we're going to explore here in terms of the betwixt and between, this time of being in a liminal threshold period. So here's a diagram of the feedback loops. As you can see, it includes the climate, food, migration, conflict, the technological, misinformation, government paralysis. I didn't mention AI, but that's part of it, of course, and the nigredo atmosphere of collective anxiety and disorientation. So here's a listing of the different crises, the differences between systemic crisis, and I We're looking at polycrisis, but I think we could also look at the meta-crisis because, of course, the systemic crisis we've already experienced, maybe in 2010, 2000, and 2007 below that, as a banking collapse, a single ecosystem failing. And then there's the multi-crisis where we see concurrent crises, but less entangled. They're more side by side, or they seem independent of each other. But the polycrisis, they're interacting and mutually amplifying, creating a systems level integrative thinking dysfunction. And of course, there's permacrisis, chronic long duration condition of instability, and a semi-normalized ongoing disruption. The meta-crisis is a crisis of paradigms. And in actuality, if I were to redo this today, we would be maybe looking at it as a meta-crisis because it's a crisis of meaning, worldviews, and erosion of the foundational stories that gave direction. So the Renaissance was a shift in consciousness. And through the Aquarian, we're looking at, we are in the Aquarian Aeon birth canal, I think. So the age of the Anthropocene, related to or denoting the current geological age, viewed as a period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment. And this is where we've been and what we're really navigating through. And we'll be looking, of course, at the Aquarian age as we, Aeon, the entrance into it as we go through. And so the potential and shadow of Aquarian Aeon is Aquarius is related to air, networks, vision, technology, distribution. It's also the age of humanity. The potential is the systemic thinking, collective consciousness, and the shadow is the hive mind and loss of individuality. So looking backward towards the Middle Ages, we have this quote, every age has its own climate of mind. The waning of the Middle Ages was not decline, but transfiguration. This is from the waning of the Middle Ages. And here here's a pros and cons. So we can see, we can compare and contract what happened, the European Renaissance, which was much more limited, to our current Aquarian Renaissance as we're entering, as we hear, in the 21st century. So there are, as you can see similarities. Of course, this is much larger and unprecedented because we've never in recorded history had a global crisis. But from the perspective of the European Renaissance, from the 14th to the 17th century, we had the Black Death, the collapse of social orders, mass mortality, versus climate crisis and pandemic, ecological and existential collapse, the fall of Constantinople and end of the Byzantine world, loss of symbolic center, to the collapse of global institutions and the decline of dominant powers, shifting world order, which is accentuated now day by day. And then we have the invention of the printing press, a revolution in knowledge dissemination versus the digital and AI revolution, a transformation of consciousness through media and networks. The Copernican revolution, decentering of the earth and human self-image, versus the quantum and AI paradigm, decentering of the ego and anthropocentrism. The discovery of the compass and the telescope, an expansion of physical and intellectual horizons, versus space exploration and planetary consciousness, hopefully an awakening of global systems thinking. We'll be looking at humanism and Petrarch a bit, rediscovery of psyche, art, and the dignity of man, versus depth psychology and inner alchemy, the rediscovery of soul, image, and embodiment. The fall of church authority, the rise of Reformation, loss of theological unity, which we won't be going into detail, but that's a big piece of the beginning of the shift. Decline of meta-narratives, the rise of pluralism, spiritual diversity, and fragmentation. and the rise of the merchant class and early capitalism, which of course was the result of the Reformation, new economic order, and now the techno capital and global economy, digital commerce, and data as new currency. And lastly, Hermetic and alchemical revival in the Renaissance, merging science, art, and spirituality. Here, now, the integration of science and psyche and consciousness, really, and the return of symbolic imagination and embodied knowing, hopefully. So here is an image I actually took in Lucerne this summer. It's of the Black Death and nigredo during the plague, which was a collective putrefactio in the nigredo. So it was a collapse of medieval order. And you can see in these images, which were actually on the bridge in Lucerne, there were many are definitely depicting this time of death, a dissolution preceding renewal. And this, thank you, Jeff. This is from Jeff, who unearthed this essay of how, which is fascinating information of how climate-driven changes in the Mediterranean grain trade mitigated famine, but also introduced the Black Death to medieval Europe. And this first wave of the second plague pandemic, the Black Death, claimed much of Europe's human population in just a few years. While it's accepted that this causative bacterium, Yersinia pestis, originated from wildlife, rodent populations in Central Asia, and reached Europe via the Black Sea, reasons for the timing and virulence have been debated. And according to this study, a post-volcanic climate downturn and trans-Mediterranean famine from 1345 to 1347 forced the Italian maritime republics of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa to activate their well-established supply network and import grain from the Mongols of the Golden Horde around the Sea of Azov in 1347. This climate-driven change in the long-distance grain trade not only prevented parts of Italy from starvation, but also introduced this plague bacterium to Mediterranean harbors and fueled its rapid dispersal across Europe. With still debated mortality rates up to 60% in parts of Europe between 1347 and 1343, the Black Death is considered one of the largest human disasters in pre-modern times. And it was the first wave of the second plague pandemic that had long-lasting demographic, economic, political, cultural, and religious implications for Europe and the wider Mediterranean region. So you can see how this is like the scaffolding for what was to come was in complete shift in consciousness. So here we have some of the changes that were happening. We have the printing press as technology for spreading information, the discovery of the printing press, the Copernican revolution, which the earth became decentered. So now the realization that the sun was the center of the universe. We were a big shift in egocentricity, isn't it? And Galileo's discovery of the telescope and Kepler's harmonies in ellipses. And then here, the fall of Constantinople, where the Greek manuscripts were carried west. And we have Ficino and Pico de Mirandola, and the beginnings of Hermeticism and Kabbalah, which we'll be looking at briefly, as a rediscovery of psyche as macrocosm of cosmos. So in 1336, Petrarch climbed Mount Venus, and his discovery of the inner and outer landscape connection, it was the birth of individual interiority and the beginning of humanism as a return to the source. And so he says, and men go about to wander at the heights of the mountains and the mighty waves of the sea, and the wide sweep of rivers, and the circuit of the oceans, and the revolution of the stars, but themselves they consider not. So, what we're looking at in these different phases is a psyche-centered cosmos. That was the beginning. In the Hermetic imagination, the cosmos was ensouled, an image of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. Each planet was understood as a living archetypal principle, a daimonic intelligence that mediated between spirit and matter. To contemplate the heavens was to contemplate the interior landscape of psyche itself. Astrology as a language of symbolic resonance, the horoscope was conceived as a mandala of the self, portraying the dynamic interplay of archetypes within the individual life. Rather than causality, it revealed correspondence, the synchronistic reflection of inner and outer worlds, with, of course, the human soul being the mediator. Through archetypal astrology, we can discern patterns of becoming rather than a fixed destiny. And then we have a Marsilio Ficino, the Renaissance philosopher, magus, practiced astrology as a form of as cura animarum, a care of the soul. Through music, art, and invocation, he sought to align the microcosm of the human soul with the macrocosm of the celestial order. This was an early articulation of what Jung later called active imagination, the dialogue between psyche and image. And then here, the astronomy, from astronomy to the loss of soul. With Kepler and Galileo, the heavens became matter in motion, quantitative rather than qualitative. The disenchantment of the cosmos marked a psychic loss, a world that was no longer alive with meaning. Depth psychology may be understood as an effort to re-ensoul a disenchanted universe. And back to Petrarch, this is a quote, I think, to a different translation, where he says, "And what is the use of knowing many things, if when you have learned the dimensions of heaven and earth, the measure of the seas, the courses of stars, the virtues of planets and stones, the secrets of nature, you still don't know yourself?" That feels very modern in our search right now. So Jung and the return of cosmic correspondence. So Jung recognized in astrology a symbolic expression of the collective unconscious, the planets mirroring the archetypal dynamics constellating within the psyche and the collective. Synchronicity becomes the modern bridge, an acausal connecting principles between inner and outer events. Richard Tarnas brings in the archetypal cosmos, and he resituates astrology as a discipline of meaning, correlating planetary cycles with epochs of cultural transformation. The outer cosmos mirrors the evolution of consciousness itself. In times of crisis, as now, archetypal patterns intensify, signaling collective initiations and thresholds of renewal. The Aquarian Renaissance, the age of Aquarius, evokes individuation on a collective scale, a movement toward wholeness through integration of diversity. However, we are currently in that birth canal, and so we're in chaos. So from Pisces to Aquarius, the shift from faith to gnosis. So the distributed networks connecting us through airways are Aquarian. So Pisces motto is actually I believe, the two fishes. Aquarius mottos is I know. And so we're moving from a time of faith and belief to a time of gnosis, knowing. But unfortunately, there are still tendrils, of course, of the old before we have made it into the new. So in Jung's Aeon, the age of Pisces, which is approximately actually 2000, I think it's about 2,150 years, is the age of faith, the suffering polarity, Christ and the Antichrist. The Renaissance was a midpoint albedo, the beginning of the Renaissance, the end of the Middle Ages, about 13th century, about 1250 years ago, we were in that place from in between Pisces. The opposite of Pisces is Virgo. So we're in that, we had gone to Virgo. Now we are in Aquarius. So modernity as a shadow emergence, pendulum shift from emotional to rational consciousness was one of the underlying principles that we saw begin to emerge after the Renaissance. So Jung speaks of an enantiodromia, a waiting for the pendulum shift and emergence of the transcendent third and consciousness moving back from lopsided left brain towards right brain intuition, imagination, and an emerging global consciousness, which includes an interconnectedness of all life. And this is what we're waiting for, all of us right now. So, alchemy and the Renaissance soul. Alchemy as the imaginal laboratory, the symbols of the conjunctio oppositorum, bringing the opposites together, the bridge to Jung's psychology. And the Aeon of Aquarius. Here, Jofra Boschart's incredible image where you can see the soul moving through that portal of death and into this new life, receiving the water of life. So the archetype of the water bearer pours the living waters of renewal upon a parched world psyche. And Jake Badley's image here, you can also see the fishes transforming into the human being, the Aquarian Renaissance that we're entering. The age of Aquarius evokes the possibility of individuation on a collective scale, the movement toward wholeness through integration of diversity and the recognition of the interdependence of all life. So what we have here is both the Renaissance and the Polycrisis are threshold periods, liminal spaces between worlds. The Renaissance remade the human mind. The Polycrisis may demand the remaking of the human heart. The question facing our century is not only whether we can innovate, but whether we can imagine a new humanism, one that includes the entire web of life. In both epochs, the future depends on imagination. The Renaissance humanists reawakened the spirit of inquiry and beauty after a time of despair. Today, amid multiple global crises, we too must discover imagination, empathy, and courage. The world stands once again at the threshold of a new aeon. The reemergence of the feminine, of interconnection, of imaginal participation heralds the birth of a planetary consciousness. That's another image here by Jake Badley. And from Jung on the power and the implications of imagination, which is very, very timely, especially today. So I'm going to play this by Dr. Jung.
When you observe the world, you see people, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see moving images, a world of images, generally known as fantasies. Yet these fantasies are facts. It is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life. Or a bridge is built. These houses were all fantasies. Everything you do here, all of the houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. It is, say, a form of energy, despite the fact we can't measure it. It is a manifestation of something. And that is a reality. That is just a reality as, for instance, the peace treaty of Versailles or something like that. It is no more, you can't show it. But it has been a fact. And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world within.
So, of course, this is unfortunately very timely this week in particular, as we've entered a time of war, and it's just a synchronicity that because I put this together some time ago. So moving forward, we're looking a little bit at the possibilities, the alchemical process from lead into gold, and the sacred marriage that appears in individuation. We are in a nigredo period, a dark night of burning down the old dross and dissolution. And the albedo would be perhaps the use of imagination. This is also happening at the same time. This is part of this tension of opposites, the emergence of a new epoch and a way of perceiving that we are all interconnected, which is necessary for life to continue. And I've used the triangle as an intermediary for this, which we'll explore a little further. And the citrinatus, which is the third phase that is often not mentioned, which is a rising dawn, the beginning of the gold, but it is not manifest yet. But we're not there yet at this moment on a global scale, but of course on an individual scale, that's our process individually of individuation. And the rebirths finally is the renewal, the return, the grounding of the new life. So this is the basic alchemical process. This is the symbol, as many of you are familiar. I use this symbol of the tree, which I won't be getting into a lot of detail, but you can see that in the symbol of the tree, you have the two polarities, the two sides, and the transcendent third that Jung spoke of. So you have the masculine and feminine, depending, the pillar of severity is connected to the feminine, on the left, and the pillar of mercy on the right. And at the top, you have the emergence of the one. The very top of the tree, of course, is the beginning, the first spark of life. This particular image down here, which is called Da in Hebrew, is designated to the gnosis, the moving between life and death. And then as we burst into time and space, because this is outside of time and space, we come into color. And this is not a course on this particular tree, but I wanted to, this is spirit and matter. And the mediator, of course, in here is psyche or soul. That is the center of everything. So we will look into, so this image, you can see that dance between the two sides. This is a Hans Holbein image, which I believe I took in Switzerland this summer. So, and here's a map of the psyche on the tree of life, and you can see what I just described. I have it upside down to the way usual images are in Jungian psychology, having the archetypal world above in spirit, and in matter, body, earth is at the bottom. And but you can see the soul as the mediator. Anima and animus are actually, you could say they're in the archetypal world. Shadow, of course, is everywhere. So the squaring of the circle is one of the many archetypal motifs which form the basic patterns of our dreams and fantasies, but it's distinguished by the fact that it is one of the most important of them from the functional point of view. Indeed, it could be called the archetype of wholeness, says Jung. And so this is, again, depicting what we looked at on the tree, with soul as mediator between spirit and matter, and an added image of the Ouroboros and the cycle of life, Earth, and the endless cyclical nature, which unfortunately, as we're watching the fall of the old order, the old patriarchal order, it's much more rigid than this. So there isn't a consciousness of the cycle, which is bringing down this terrible collapse. So the reason I use the triangle as it depicts the tension of opposites and that transcendent third that Jung speaks about, the transcendent function, which we're hoping will illuminate our process into an enantiodromia shift. So again, the yin or feminine on the left side here, the yang masculine on the right, and the transformation point at the apex of the pyramid of transformation. So here from Marie-Louise von Franz, she says, if we can stay with the tension of opposites long enough, sustain it, be true to it, we can sometimes become vessels within which the divine opposites come together and give birth to a new reality. So that, the transcendent function being the new reality, we hope. So here, for some of you, you've seen this particular way of looking at the alchemical process, looking at the chrysalis as a map for meaning. So in the chrysalis, the caterpillar does dissolve. Its identity liquefies. In fact, it apparently fights against it because it's a death. And yet it is overtaken by nature because the imaginal cells begin to organize in spite of its rebellion. And the psyche undergoes a similarly symbolic death to be reformed. The ego disintegrates and dissolves, and before the new consciousness can arise. So individually and collectively, this is the alchemy of crisis and the true meaning of metamorphosis. And we see the chrysalis process as I'm going to just, because the caterpillar must die to become the butterfly. So too must the world's Piscean myth of belief dissolve to be born to the Aquarian age of consciousness of humanity's remembering of the web of life's interconnectedness. And the butterfly, of course, at the other end is indeed a symbol for psyche. Psyche meaning soul. So as you can see, the caterpillars has no interest in anything. The ego stage of life and consumption, and the chrysalis being the dissolution, the dark night of the soul, and then the imaginal cells being the hidden soul potential and seeds of transformation, and becoming the butterfly. So this is our process, we're in the middle of it. So we stand at a threshold between worlds dissolving and worlds being born. The old maps no longer contain us. The myths that shaped our vision have turned to ash. Yet in the darkness, a new pattern stirs. The imagination of what is yet to be seeks the light. This is the work, to dwell within the chrysalis of the unknowns until coherence is born anew. There are just some thoughts on that. And again, from Dr. Jung, the great problem of our time is that we don't understand what is happening to the world. We are confronted with the darkness of our soul. We have no dominance, communally shared archetypes anymore. They are in the future. Our hitherto believed values decay accordingly, and our only certainty is that the new world will be something different from what we were used to. We stand on the threshold of a new spiritual epoch, and from the depths of our own psychic life, new spiritual forms will be born. Let's hope so. And this very timely piece from Jung.
The world hangs on a thin thread. Yes. And that is the psyche of man. Nowadays, we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an H-bomb. That is all man's doing. Yeah. We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche? Yeah. You see? And so you see, it is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is of man, how important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man have any importance whatever. One thinks, oh, he has just what he has in his head. It is all from his surrounding, his thought, such a thing, believes such a thing. And particularly if he's well housed and well fed, then he has no idea. That's the great mistake. Because he is just that as which he is born, and he is not born as tabula rasa, but as a reality.
So unfortunately, that is very timely, because something has gone wrong with the psyche, it seems. And so coming towards the end, again, from Dr. Jung, if only a worldwide consciousness could arise, that all division and fission are due to the splitting of opposites in the psyche, then we should know where to begin. On our beautiful planet. And from Robert Flood, the image of the anima mundi, the world soul. And a couple of things to end. This is from Ursula Le Guin from The Dispossessed, an Ambiguous Utopia. And I thought this was appropriate for tonight, and for our time. We have nothing but our freedom. We have nothing to give you but your own freedom. We have no law but the single principle of mutual aid between individuals. We have no government but the single principle of free association. We have no states, no nations, no presidents, no premiers, no chiefs, no generals, no bosses, no bankers, no landlords, no wages, no charity, no police, no soldiers, no wars. Nor do we have much else. We are sharers, not owners. We are not prosperous. None of us is rich. None of us is powerful. If it is ourness you want, if it is the future you seek, then I tell you that you must come to it with empty hands. You must come to it alone and naked as the child comes into the world, into his future, without any past, without any property, wholly dependent on other people for his life. You cannot take what you have not given, and you must give yourself. You cannot buy the revolution. You cannot make the revolution. You can only be the revolution. It is in your spirit, or it is nowhere. Now, it's certainly an ambiguous utopia that it was, but, we begin here. We are beginning a new beginning where we have to let go of power to receive love and community. So, from T.S. Eliot, we shall not cease from all our exploring, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. So this is a more recent painting by Jake Badley of the Anima Mundi. And lastly, this poem by Yeats, speaking of poets, from the Rosa Alchemica. As I thought of these things, I drew aside the curtains and looked out into the darkness, and it seemed to my troubled fancy that all those little points of light filling the sky were the furnaces of innumerable divine alchemists, who labor continually, turning lead into gold, weariness into ecstasy, bodies into soul, the darkness into God. And at their perfect labor, my mortality grew heavy, and I cried out, as so many dreamers and men of letters in our age have cried, for the birth of that elaborate spiritual beauty which could alone uplift souls weighted with so many dreams. And may we emerge whole and intact, our butterfly. And so that's the end. I will end here, and I know it was a lot, and I guess we can open. I'm going to stop the share. Yeah, and open this to questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Eva. That was beautiful. You always bring such beautiful images to your presentations. They're very rich, and there's a lot to integrate from this. So, in I guess I don't want to say exercise. That sounds too too much like work, but in an experience of collective wisdom here today, we can integrate all of this together: the polycrisis, the different eons, the Renaissance, Jung, poets, and synchronicity. And over here on this side of Monterey Bay, we have these beautiful butterfly sanctuaries, and the butterflies have been suffering. In other words, there haven't been the numbers of butterflies that there have been in the past. And so as you were talking, I looked up the butterfly count in Pacific Grove, which is the closest one here. And in the past, I have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of butterflies in this, little square block of land, wintering there. The count this year, does anybody want to take a wild guess? 3. Not quite that bad. 26. 26. There are usually hundreds or thousands of butterflies there. So if we want to, look at outer and inner, like what does the loss of actual butterflies mean about the loss of soul? I mean, rationalists might say absolutely nothing.
We are seriously impoverished.
Yeah.
Yes, we're seriously in an in-between. Yeah. Dissolution, Dan is saying here. Dissolution, we're in a process of dissolution. Yes. Feel free to unmute yourselves and to appear if you'd like. I'd love to see you.
Yeah, my video isn't working, but it's so nice to be back in this conversation with you. I've been having those disillusioned dreams still.
Oh, you have. Well, lovely to almost see you here, Dan. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that process, that the chrysalis process seems to mirror the process of the alchemical process quite accurately. And we're certainly in it, aren't we? We're in the cocoon phase.
So one thing we could do is talk about the polycrisis through the butterfly, because so many things impact the life of the butterfly, the monarch in particular. you know, from the ecological situation with climate change and the loss of its main food source, the milkweed, which isn't just limited to its loss through climate. It's also, you know, milkweed would grow along the sides of roads and, you know, in fields and things like that. And, you know, then the Department of Transportation sprays weed killer along the sides of roads. And so that eliminates more milkweed. And the pesticides, you know, get into the pesticides and herbicides get into the plants. And if they are lucky enough to eat some milkweed, you know, they're also eating the pesticides and the herbicides, which are, you know, weakening their own body systems. And I mean, how can we bring, you know, the financial system into this as well? You know, that these pesticides and herbicides are, you know, making some people a heck of a lot of money. So, you know, we can see just in the simple life of the monarch butterfly, many different human systems and their impacts. So I'm gonna stop there, but let other people like maybe expand that from literal butterflies to psyche and soul.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And just to say that, I mean, this is, of course, the nature of polycrisis, and now we are really in a meta crisis because our entire paradigm is collapsing. I think the old patriarchal structures are collapsing. Their time is just done. But like the chrysalis process, it's not, you know, it's going to fight against its dissolution. Dan says that what Lisa is articulating reminds me of all the factors, the interconnectedness, and how disorienting. I missed the last part of what you said, and how disorienting and overwhelming it can be to try to make sense of it all, let alone cultivating meaning from it. But I think that one of the reasons I wanted to bring in the Western Renaissance, even though it was a much smaller scale, and that it's our recorded history, is that you could see that there were overlapping things happening. It wasn't just a dissolution and a breakdown, that breakdown led to a renewal. And it took at that time over 300 years for that to happen. Right now, all that is happening very quickly, and there's much more danger, and we are at stake. But yes, I mean, there's any one of these, whether you're looking at any one of these are, they're all happening at the same time. So whichever one any of you would like to speak to. would be
Eve,
welcome.
I wonder, using the word Renaissance here in that period, or certainly the first half of that period, say from Petrarch through Ficino or Flood or one of the humanists, Erasmus, Thomas More, that in that time they thought of themselves as getting back. They thought of themselves as reviving something that had been forgotten. I mean, the classical learning that was first revived by the Arabs in Spain, and then later with the manuscripts from Constantinople. So, and of course, what they thought of as not, I think, not so much certainly I may have been very pessimistic about their own times, but they also thought of it as a 1500 year, or at least 1000-year breakdown. And the revival was of these texts that was far more than the limited number of texts that were Latin texts that were available for 1,000 years. And I wonder, is there anything about that that teaches us at all today? I can't quite see anything going on now that has that sense of revival. I mean, okay, Jung's going back to the 16th century. I mean, there's something was and is something valuable in that. And maybe the Hermetic tradition and revival. But I wonder what you think. I mean, is there something in that word Renaissance that then gets the whole spirit of that history?
Oh, it's thank you.
The history of revival, of finding something from before that then moves forward.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that, I mean, of course, Jung himself, that was so much of his work. He went back and researched so much of his life. I mean, I had the opportunity to be in his library this last summer, and so there was yes, there's 4,000 volumes in his library, and so much of his work was going back to the ancients and to going back to these medieval and Renaissance texts and trying to find meaning that would make sense. And of course, this whole idea of alchemy emerged from exploring those texts and alchemy being the alchemical processes being analogous to our psychical processes as we move through our own individuation process. So yeah, I think that there is a cyclic nature historically, and perhaps one of the things that you bring up that is so important, Peter, is what we're missing is when certainly in the United States, is we've forgotten to look back. We're not looking back at history. We're behaving as though there were no history. We've lost that, and without that knowledge of where we've been, it becomes really dangerous moving forward because we have no ground, we have no history. So I think it's really important to go back and to draw from those periods. And one of the hopeful things that I think why I bring up the Renaissance is because, yes, of course, there was Petrarch and the humanists, there was the Black Death, but out of all of that, so much emerged. We saw an entire shift in consciousness. There was the whole consciousness shifted from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance and then to the age of what we call so-called Enlightenment. And now we're seeing that breakdown again, and there's a new aeon. But we are also witnessing a new aeon.
Eva, excuse me, Eva, I want to pick up on Peter's comment. The other thing that was happening with the Renaissance was a recentering from God in the sky to man. Okay, this rediscovery of, I think it was Protagoras' statement, "Man is the measure of all things." That was a radical revisioning of the role of humans in the cosmos. Does that hold anymore? I mean, what is to be rediscovered? Are we still the measure of all things, or is that belief the hubris that's embedded in that, the shadow in that, that's brought us to the state that we're in right now? And if so, what needs to be either discovered or rediscovered?
Yeah.
A new centering, okay, that could help us address the polycrisis.
So
Yeah.
in the circles that I hang out in, which aren't obviously everybody's circles, it seems to me like what we're going back to is even farther back than where the Renaissance went. The Renaissance went back to ancient Greece. And I see a lot of people going back to indigenous practices, into like a slow food movement, a slow everything these days, as well as ancient Egypt, which is where alchemy, got started even before it went to Europe. And so it's like, given the severity of the crisis we're in right now, we need to like go back into deeper time, into deeper history. I don't know. That's just it's just a thought that came to mind. I don't claim that it's true.
Well, I think that this is a big problem. We really are in a time where, we're in the middle of the dissolution. We're really in the cocoon. And I think, as, Jeff also just pointed out, and, we have forgotten our roots, and our roots being our humanity, because it's a big crisis, I think, for us, that we have lost that we are on the verge of losing our humanity before we have discovered our humanity. And our humanity is now the realization that, we are interconnected, that to the web of life, and that we are not just the center, that we are just a part of this web. And it's really disastrous. I mean, I think in talking about the new aeon, I was hoping to bring some hope. We're still waiting for Jung's enantiodromia for the swing. We know that hopefully nature swings back. Let's hope it happens soon. But, even as this week, we are all reeling at the moment, aren't we? We just entered a massive time of war. It's unprecedented. Well, it has been predicted. It's certainly astrologically been predicted. We have Pluto, the planet of death and transformation, has entered into Aquarius. So there's a new consciousness that needs to be birthed, and that new consciousness has to be about interconnectedness.
Difference. It's going to be much more getting the work done.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's helpful. I certainly don't have answers to any of this. And, we're all kind of in shock right now at where we are, because it's really a challenge to try to find where is that apex point of the transcendent third. How do we bring this darkness and together with some hope? But we're all here. I mean, we're here. And, and Aquarius is related not only to technology and the airwaves, and also perversity in the shadow side, and this hive mind. When as Jung reminds us, if we don't focus on each of us on taking responsibility for ourselves and our own individuation process, and then we're in deep trouble. And I wrote something today because I was thinking that on the one hand, the governments of the world are way behind, because the people of the world are already moved on. I mean, even here tonight, we have people from many different places. So we are already a global community because of this Aquarian technological shift that I think began sometime around COVID. We are already interconnected. People are gathering and moving as humanity. We're seeing protests, and people are ready for peace. It's the governments that are really behind, and I think that that's the danger. The patriarchy, which has again nothing to do with men, and it has everything to do with power. Is holding on for dear life when it's going to have to surrender. So that's my hope. Maybe too hopeful. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Renaissance did lead to the Reformation and to the rise of the middle class. And so there was an entire shift in consciousness. And then we went into the age of enlightenment, which was unfortunately a time of disenchantment and egocentricity, really. I mean,
Enlightened is sad.
yeah, it's a challenging moment, isn't it? I mean, I created this sometime back in September or October, and then when I was looking at it to offer it to all of you, I thought, wow, what a moment, what a strangely synchronistic moment, and a week when we have the beginning of so much war.
Could one make a case this is still too early for hope? That there's a
Perhaps.
sort of case. I mean, I'd like to that you introduced the bridge at Lucerne. I was there last summer too, and that's a wonderful collection of memento mori. And do we need to marinate longer in the memento mori?
Yeah, yes, it seems so, does it not? It seems like, yeah, and
I mean, it was only 20 years ago that this country was overwhelmed with hubris, right? With winning the Cold War and everything was going to be wonderful in the end of history. That's not very long ago.
yeah.
Indeed, the imaginal cells do need to reorganize into an entirely new shape.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so. We need a completely new. And you know, when you're in the middle of that, you can't imagine yet what that's going to look like. And all we know is that we have to come back to ground. We have to come back to the center. And the center, as it said, is the heart. You know, there needs to be that coherence between heart and mind and body. Um, but I don't have answers, only questions. So, like yourselves, I think that one of the concerns for those of Jungians here is that Jung what had his visions at the end of his life were not exactly positive.
Is there anything you can say too as an astrologer to the all of the astrological things that are happening right now? I mean, we just had a blood moon lunar eclipse, and those 6 planets all lined up, and like those
So,
sorts of things.
yeah, so I will say, just on a broad level, is that what all of the astrologers right now are talking about is the shift into the Aquarian age. Why? Because, for instance, Neptune and Saturn moved together on the February 14th. Saturn moved into Aries at 0 degrees, and they were exact on February 20th. Now, that has never happened before. Apparently, according to some astrologers, it hasn't happened in recorded history. That now Aries signifies the beginning. It's the birth. It's the beginning. It's the beginning of spring. And, you know, so that, and then tomorrow Venus is going to join them. So I don't know, we don't know what that's going to look like, because there is this multivalence. Like, what does Saturn Neptune mean? I mean, is that Saturn has to do with contraction and has to do with reality and obstacles, and then here we have Neptune, which is the boundarylessness and imagination. Is that we can which direction are we going to move? That we don't know. Are we going to use our imagination to create a new structure? Or the old structure is going to take us off into some dark fantasy? We don't know that. That's the wild card. But the other things that are going on astrologically is Pluto moved into Aquarius, that's air. Saturn, Neptune have moved into Aries, which is fire. Gemini, Aquarius, which is the ruler of Aquarius. I want to say Uranus is going to move into Gemini, so that's air. So all of the planets this year are all moving to beginning into from earth and water into air and fire. And so we know that we're coming into a completely different view and to move into this consciousness. And that's why, that's the hope that somewhere along the way, if we have the collective, enough people awakening to, to life, right? That we can acknowledge that this is a new beginning. It's happening whether we like it or not. Now, what form that takes is really dependent on the level of consciousness that we bring to it, right? Yeah. There's so many factors, right? Because there's the climate, which is huge, and now the wars on top of that, and the diaspora of people having to move, and the collapse of our economic situation. So it's all happening at the same time. And so none of us really can know where we are exactly, except when we're housed in our bodies. And yeah, that's just, I don't know. I'm sure there's so many questions here. And anyone else want to say something? I know that it was there was a lot there, and I'm bringing in different perspectives. I'm hoping that the butterfly imagery and the chrysalis process is helpful and to get an overview.
It's interesting to know that the caterpillar fights against that. I didn't know that before.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, that it resists the transformation just as because it doesn't want to die. It wants to remain a caterpillar. The other thing that I thought was extraordinary, and I think Dan knows because he was with me, if he's still here, I don't know, that in Marion Woodman's book, The Pregnant Virgin, the first chapter, the book was actually supposed to be called Chrysalis. But at the first chapter, she talks about that when the butterfly, and I did not know this, emerges out of the chrysalis, it emits a drop of blood. So there's a sacrifice, as it becomes a butterfly. And as a butterfly, it can be quite confused and soggy and doesn't quite know it is at its beginning. So, yeah.
Well, I'm kind of drawn to two elements in the discussion and in our ongoing discussions here. But one being Jung's mentioning of fantasy and the fact of fantasy, but what is the nature of fantasy? How can we dig into that a bit?
Yeah. Thank you. By the way, I think, John, when Jung is speaking of fantasy, there's two different, isn't there? Someone else can really, there's two different ways to look at fantasy. One is that it's not related to reality, that it's kind of like an addictive thing where you're escaping. And then I think he's speaking about imagination, even there. When he speaks about fantasy, he's speaking about using the imagination as a creative
Yeah.
process. Yes.
He says well, this is in types. He says essentially the play with the fantasy image is the source of all creativity. So these aren't ego generated
Right.
images. These are images that are coming up within psyche that the ego can then play with. And
Right.
it's those fantasy images that are the root of he says, all creativity. So
Yes.
that was a very important, and that's, I think, is an essential. If I am imagining, what are we looking back to? What are we reconnecting to that is a part of the new myth? The fantasy image has to play of the image, has to be a critical element or component of that new myth.
Yes.
Because it's been degraded, it's been dismissed. We have to cognitively, rationally create things through our will, and that's where the emphasis should be. If you play with fantasy images, well, and in fact, Jung says this in the same paragraph. It's dismissed as childish behavior because only children play with fantasy images.
Yes. Yes.
If we look at the world situation today, in terms of what are the preeminent fantasies that are in play, such as the fantasy that is motivating the war in the Middle East.
Right. Exactly. That's the danger, he says, of the psyche. Exactly. So
Well, I'd like
we comes back, doesn't it, to having to take, as Jeff was saying also, this, we have to take responsibility for the direction, and we have to become conscious of.
Well, you have to ask, where is that fantasy emerging from?
right.
Rather than acting on the fantasy, you reflect on the fantasy, you play with the fantasy.
Right. Well, that's the big key. I mean, the word reflect.
Yeah.
Yes, self-reflection, to be able to stop before reaction, to
Because
respond instead of react. Yeah.
we're living in a world of impulsivity.
Yes. Wild instinct. Yeah, unrestrained instinct, which couldn't be more dangerous.
Well, but instinct is also archetypal.
Yes, given that we reflect on it and not, when we're talking about alchemically, we're talking about sulfur here. Is it a compulsive, impulsive act, or do you actually sit with it?
That's so interesting, Jeff. I mean, to bring it back to the astrology, is that sulfur would be connected, of course, to fire and
Right.
to the fire element, and that we have this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and then Venus joining in us, of course, on March 21st at the equinox, the sun will join in them as well. So we are in a time of sulfur, in a sense, it's fire. And that is so dangerous if it's not mitigated by water or
Contained.
contained. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
So
the danger is a fact.
yes,
Yeah.
indeed, indeed.
The other element that I've been working with here is the word that we use, soul. What do we mean by that? And Jung brings that word up a lot. How is soul configured in all of these fantasies, such as the fantasies that we are sharing here at the moment in this discussion?
Mm-hmm.
There's
I'm
always,
wondering if, I'm wondering if, I mean, soul was a word that came in the Renaissance, right? It became something that people were focusing on. Do we need a new, well, let's just quote Hillman, do we need to revision soul?
Yeah, I've always seen, I mean, I think Jung saw it this way too, see soul as a mediator between between spirit and matter, if you like. But I mean, right now I'm really intrigued. Some of you are aware of this, but the physicists currently are talking about consciousness, and they're proving consciousness became before everything else. That's the new conversation right now amongst physicists, which I think is really, really interesting because basically they've just replaced the word God with consciousness. You know, whether you call it collective unconscious, whether you, and even Jung came right out and said the collective unconscious is God, but he didn't want to use the word God because it's too loaded. So I don't think that's paraphrasing here. He didn't say loaded, but you know, he couldn't use that. But you know, it is that essence of spirit that permeates everything. And yes, it's a, you know, again, you know, coming back to the conjunctions, right? Because that's the first conjunctio, isn't it? It's a connection. Or is the first conjunctio is the separation of soul and body from spirit in order for the reflection to be possible. And the second conjunctio being, you know, once that realization is to reconnect. But for that, you have to have first separated and self-reflected. Yes?
Like
And
Eva, I was
yeah.
thinking, could we bring in also the analogy of when you speak about the consciousness? So the shift from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex, which they, you know, the cortex which is ever evolving. In fact, it is with the human that the cortex has come into you know, the evolutionary cycle that they say, right? So the limbic system is rooted in millions of years of that evolutionary cycle. And in a way that has holds mankind ransom to, you know, many things. And the evolving cortex, the prefrontal cortex, which is the seat for language and empathy and communication, which are human skills, which are like unique to the human world. And how this could also be kind of seen from that perspective of us, you know, who've been so much in the grip of that limbic system. And now we are moving towards that. Maybe something else is opening up in our consciousness, being formed as also anatomy, like maybe, you know, new synapses, neuron synapses are being created as more and more people invest in individuation, such that there is a collective shift. So, but for at each individual level, it is those, you know, change of something in that anatomy, or physically as well as physiologically. And so in a way, it also connects to the science of Teilhard Chardin, the French philosopher, as also Gebser, who spoke about mutations and, you know, change in consciousness through mutations, as also Aurobindo Ghosh's philosophy from India, which speaks about, you know, the ever-evolving consciousness, the mental work that we have to do. And he speaks of a super mind. So as more and more, like the signature of all things in Elizabeth Gilbert, she speaks about, she ends the book with of how human beings are more to do with compassion and empathy. And this is something which is birthing now. And so it is such a chaotic, difficult, conflicted passage, because we've been more so in the limbic system. And now, since this is birthing, so it is so dark and so conflicted, also to do with the masculine feminine principle, right?
Yeah.
So whatever we may say, like, you know, where is that renaissance happening? Where is, you know, but for sure, the feminine principle is rising. That's an evidence. That's an evidence which tells us that, yes, a new consciousness is taking birth.
Yes.
You know,
Thank
that
you.
is going on, and that's why it's so dark and conflicted. So
Yeah,
that is,
thank you. Can I pronounce it? Is it Janita? Janita?
yeah, Janita, yes.
Janita, yes. I mean, that's very much my thinking. And I think what we're seeing, and we didn't get into this on this particular call, is the rise of the feminine, which again has nothing to do with gender, but it does have to do with the evolution and compassion. And it's not a going back to matriarchy, it's a rebalancing. And I think I was really struck because our so-called leaders right now of the world are operating from that limbic. It's like the cortex is broken down, and they're operating from the limbic. So I think that's what you're saying, and yet, you know, it's instinctual, but yes, something is evolving. And as you said that, I was remembering that when I was doing this program called Sophia Sparks, which some of you were on, that during COVID, the top of the tree of life, which we're using, is called the crown. And as we were doing that, this was during COVID, it was like the crown opened. The crown opened and this new energy began to come through. And I mean, I have no way of scientifically proving that this was happening, but it was an energetic field that we were feeling together. I think that is happening. And also thank you for bringing up that we are in a birth canal. And the birth canal is really a dangerous, dangerous process, right? Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for that.
It could go any which way. So there's all the
Yes.
risks involved. So the second thing, what you said about the crown, it suddenly brought to mind about Shri Aurobindo Ghosh's philosophy of when he speaks about the overmind, he says that, you know, the living world is so rooted in matter. It's so enmeshed in that, and it's a great gravitational pull. So so his philosophy says that there's an energy from the top which has to, you know, pull us up. So when you speak about that crown opening and an energetic, so it kind of links to Aurobindo Ghosh's philosophy.
Oh, I didn't know because I don't know his work, but that's yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And we could experience that. And I think that the heart is that place. If we can reconnect with the heart and through the heart, you know, both vertically, you know, the spirit coming through, but the heart being the mediator, the heart being psyche and soul, but also horizontally as community, a global community. I mean, where are you right now? Where are you located?
So I'm located in Goa in India.
So this is the incredible other side of this, that we are all together in the same time and space, and yet we are in different places and time zones. And that's very Aquarian. That's remarkable. Yes, that we are together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it happened with COVID, with that lockdown when it happened, this whole world just opened up, and I was, you know, like it was very thrilling in a way, whatever that dark period that we went through, but it was like, you know, the whole world's at my doorstep, and we entered into rooms and conversations, and you know. So the second thing that I wanted to bring up is that the shadow that you know, brought in, I think it was in the first or second slide about the hive mentality.
Yes.
The hives, yeah. And on the other side, this pull to a new consciousness is to do with individuality, which is more so about individuation. But on the other side, it's more so to do with a spiritually conscious community. So
Yes.
if we juxtapose the two, there are two polarities, the hive and the community on the other side, which is beckoning us.
Exactly.
Which again, when you brought out that quote by ML about two opposites and we become vessels, the quote that you put out by Maria Louise.
France.
Yes. Yeah, One France by ML. So yeah, of how we can become vessels of those two polarities. So I thought the hive and on the other side, it's like it could be put in there. And the last, I'd like to commend that, you know, we had the speaker last week, Glenn.
Yes,
And
which I
Glenn
tried to
gave
get
us-
on and I couldn't get
All
on.
right.
There was some,
Okay.
unfortunately. I'm going to listen
So-
to that.
Yeah, so Glenn gave us a beautiful metaphor, which is again very much a part of Eastern philosophy of the lotus, of how the lotus is rooted in filth and stagnation, and and how when that flower emerges, it's like new consciousness emerges from all that mire, from all that detritus, and and when it emerges, then that's so beautiful and so unlike whatever it has come from.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And that's very alchemical as well, right? Because it's out of the dross, it's out of the breakdown of old matter that the new emerges. So that's why the whole prima materia, the primal matter, was really, well, it's shit. And out of
And out of that,
out of that comes
it's born,
the
it's
new,
birthed,
yeah. As we said, it makes great fertilizer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
even
here we are. So that's the hope, and it's challenging to hold that right now, because we are in such a dark time, and to try to remember to hold that tension of opposites is really challenging. Because it's much easier to pretend nothing's going on in some parts of the world, and other parts of the world, people are mired in this disaster. And so John Henry says, on the journey of becoming butterfly and transitioning, a type of death, isn't interesting that we seem to be trying to talk about a grok, what's happening, and new paradigms while in the throes of death. Yeah.
Also see his earlier comment along the lines of modern neuroanatomy. Just look up a few.
Oh, yes, I see it. Yes. You want to read it?
Okay. Along the lines of modern neuroanatomy and brain science and function, dare we mention ideas about the integration, either symbolically or literally, of functions that the ancients imputed to the pineal gland?
Yeah.
When you
could
were
say more about that.
when you were talking about the crown chakra.
Yeah, where is the pineal gland? I think the pineal gland is actually in the back of the
Third
neck.
eye.
Oh,
Nope,
it's at the third eye.
Right in, right, kind of at the bindu.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's not actually in the crown, is it? Because the crown is here where, when we're born, where it's called crowning when we're born.
Mhm.
Yep.
Top of the head.
Well, we have yet to bring in also, but the electronic. Certainly our gathering here this evening is electronic in character. And this is another major disturbance in the field, or a factor in the field. How are we even describing neuronic relations to electronic transitions? What would a scientist at CERN have to contribute to our conversation?
Would you like to speak to that, or does I don't, I don't know how to, but do you have an idea, John, or does someone else?
Well, considering that electronic signals are vibrations, and if you get down to it, neuronic signals are vibrations. And if you get down to it, what they're doing at CERN is about vibrations, and what else is psyche but that kind of field? I mean, Jung, when we were talking earlier about you know, revisioning our notion of psyche, I think Jung made a great contribution to that by flipping it from the alchemical, psyche, soul as the dove descending from above to the human, to us being within psyche. Psyche isn't outside coming in. We are within psyche. And I don't know, to the extent that we correlate that with the various electronic and neuronic vibrations that we are also within. I mean, we're within all kinds of fields here.
Yeah, that's true. And that reminds me that, we are unsouled, what you're saying, we are ensouled. The body is within the soul. And but there are so many frequencies and vibrations right now that we are completely not aware of, that are influencing us, right? And
well, then that they're also entangled with our fantasies. I mean, we can speak about what's going on at CERN. We can also ask what's going on at Los Alamos.
well, there's a lot of talk about aliens right now. Keeping an eye out.
Well, if I can say about that is, what are they waiting on?
Well, maybe they're not waiting. Maybe they've been here for a while.
Let's have it face to face. I think that the term you have brought up several times and has been a part of the discussion of danger. What is the danger? What has always been the danger? How can we describe that? How do we live with that? I mean, the danger within each of us, the danger among us. I mean, the danger is not somewhere else. The danger is right here.
Yes, and that is what Jung was saying, right? The danger is the psyche. It's within us, and as Janita was saying, we each have to do our own work. And at the same time, we have to kind of hold the vertical and the horizontal simultaneously. Like tonight, we are here in the horizontal where we're connected, in community. But we're also doing the work where we're our own soul work.
Peter?
I think that the question of danger is actually very tricky, because one of the ways of perceiving danger is to think of a danger of an assault on connectedness, on the things that hold us together. And if you think of the Renaissance, well, actually late Renaissance, scientific revolution kind of time, 1600s, the assault is in some ways an assault on the principle that holds things together, the great chain of being, the great chain of being that descends from God down to matter, from God to shit, basically, and which man is about halfway down. And from our present perspective, it's maybe a little hard to think of that as a danger, because we're the product of this assault. But from the perspective of the time itself, that was a danger. They couldn't conceive of a universe or human world without the great chain of being, without that holding everything together. Yeah.
So can you say more about the chain of being?
Well, this is a theological, philosophical, and political idea. It ties together hierarchies in society. It's king down to peasant, and men to women, of course. Of course, in the Middle Ages. Um, and also in terms of from the highest things, God, angels, highest intellectual and moral principles, down to the inertness or badness of matter. And the human world and the human principles and the natural philosophical principle were one and the same. There's no difference between a world that governs God versus matter and the world that governs principles within human society.
Well, and as Eva was saying at the very beginning, with the age of Aquarius, there's a shift. It's like the great chain of being has become the great network of being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's impossible, but absolutely, it's impossible to see where we're going to emerge because we're in the middle of the birth canal right now. So that's what makes it so challenging. And we're certainly in the nigredo. There's no question about that, I'm sure. But at the same time, aren't there incredible discoveries being made in terms of health and longevity, and there are things that are not publicized very much that are emerging in terms of new inventions, and yeah, I mean, there's no, just the fact that we are all here right now in our various locations, and yet we are all here now is just remarkable and did not happen before 2020. So it seems like that was a quite abrupt stopping point, and then we shifted into something different, but it's still forming. It's not solid. But it also was something you said, Peter, that I thought was curious. Of course, matter was designated as evil for so long, right? As was, I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday about how they were quite shocked. I said, you do know that in the Middle Ages, they said animals and women had no souls. And this was a woman I was talking to and was really shocked, but that's a fact. Yeah. And
Sorry. I mean, there's a security in being held within the chain. And certainly contemporary observers looking at both political revolutions of the time, theological revolutions, rational revolutions like the early scientific revolution, Galileo, others, felt this tremendous threat that without those bonds holding people together, there is nothing.
right. It's kind of what we're feeling now too, isn't it? That if we don't have the old structures, that there's nothing. But human beings never function well without a system of security, and our system of security is collapsing. And so we don't know where we are, how to locate ourselves.
Eva,
Yes,
I
David.
have a comment. Well, I'm holding it together. We're going into a change, and this change is a death, and which requires a change of perspective. And this perspective that we're living at, we're living in at this time, we're living in a material perspective. Our approach to everything that you've talked about, from the challenges from the Renaissance to now, are all related to materialism and how we view the world and how we view what's important. And the death we go through is we have to change that perspective.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, if we look at the tree of life, we're living in Malkuth. right?
Well, we're
and-
living, or else we're living on one side of the tree, not the other. We're out
right.
of balance.
But yes, but our perspective, it's our perspective that we need to raise to at least to, you saw it. We have to look from, we look, when I listen to everybody, we're talking about spirit and psyche and soul from the perspective of the body, from this perspective of the material, which is fundamentally limiting. And we're running into the wall right now. Everything that's happening is part of that limitation that we need to. So we have to change the perspective to perceive from the non-physical perspective, whatever we want to call that, and learn what that means. It'll change our understanding of spirit and psyche and soul, and hopefully that leads us to you would call heart, but I call love.
Okay, yes, love.
So,
I mean, love is the great balancer, isn't it?
is a communicator and bringing together and coming together in that way. So looking down rather than up, to gain that perspective and to look at what happens after death. It's just a door opening. What's a door opening into?
Yeah, it's a portal. Yeah.
It's a portal. So
Yeah.
that's
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And actually, what we're, body, but actually, we are living in a very egoic world,
yes.
So, yeah, on a Kabbalistic level, that is part of also of Yesod, depending on what level you're talking about. But it is, yeah, I mean, it's the ego that is dissolving, and it's almost like it's the world ego that is dissolving. There.
Eva, can you, there's a comment in the chat that maybe we can get to before we.
Oh, yes, that's lovely. Yes, the one about the drop of blood.
Yeah.
Okay, so it said who somebody wrote, I don't know who. Can you speak more on the drop of blood and sacrifice when the butterfly emerges, when that is supposed to represent in history and present? I don't know that. Thank you for the question. It's a lovely question, but it's something that came to me. We were doing a class on the chrysalis process and polycrisis from the perspective of our dreams a few months ago, and this came up. And it's in the second page of Marion Woodman's Pregnant Virgin, where she speaks to that there's a drop of blood when the butterfly emerges and that it's a sacrifice. On a personal level, of course, in our process of individuation, there's always a sacrifice because there's a sacrifice of the sense of self, of the egoic sense of self to something larger, right? To the soul. So on that level, how that is represented in history, I think, well, we're seeing that right now, right? There are, we're seeing lives sacrificed. Yeah. So I don't know exactly if that's supposed to represent in history specifically, but I think there's always a sacrifice. There's always a letting go of that which is no longer whole. I guess John could speak to that because I'm not a Gebzerian, but you would say that is the deficient mental is getting stuck in the old, and we have to, it's what we were talking about. It's sacrificing. There's a sacrifice always to the new, whether it's the personal ego or the collective. Does that make sense? Or does that answer the question? Or does anyone want to add to that?
It does occur to me, Jung's statement that something to the effect of any advance for individuation or self-realization is taken by the ego as a loss or
That's right.
sacrifice, we might say. But then we have to dig into, the term sacrifice, which ultimately means to make sacred. Sacrificio.
That's right. Right.
But I also think, as we are about out of time, I've been in a Hillman journey lately, thanks to Catherine and fate. But that the work of soul is not an egoic undertaking. So that what we're doing here, what we do each week, why we gather here, and then and all your work is soul is amongst us. No, I don't come in with a packaged soul within me, and we sort of expose our packages. But soul is we are in soul, as we already said earlier.
Yes.
And if we're going to bring in Hillman, Hillman in his final work with Shamdasani quotes W.H. Auden, and he emphasizes this. We are lived by powers we pretend to understand.
Yeah.
So in this, the humility, as you've said many times tonight, you what you don't know, and what all of us together, what we don't know. And in some ways, there's a sacrifice of knowing for the unknowing, for the unknown.
Yeah, thank you, John, for that. And I think that the big difference, I mean, really, I think I mentioned this earlier in response to what you're saying, is the age of belief is ending, and the belief is in a way a child state, because you're allowing yourself to be taken care of, by I believe. And I remember the first time I heard Hillman speak actually was at an astrological conference, and he came out and he said, I don't believe in anything. I don't believe. And I think what he was saying is what Jung said when they asked him if he believed in God, and he said, I don't believe, I know. And that's the gnosis. That's the gnosis. And that knowing, it's not an intellectual knowing, it's a different kind of knowing that, and I think that is the motto for the Aquarian age. It's a new kind of knowing that comes through, us. And it's not coming from an institution.